It is November 3rd, 2023, 10:04 p.m. My name is Kessie Ian Anderson. Welcome back for another edition of Heresiarch. In this edition, I'm going to discuss artificial intelligence, George Orwell's 1984, specifically Room 101, and what Judaism wants to accomplish with us, and if we do not adhere to what they want. It is 100% selfishness. It is 100% total control upon you and yours. Let's get started. So in Judaism, they have a term called Golem. A golem is a clay figure brought to life by magic, Jewish mysticism. It was a soulless lump of clay, and then it ended up getting an animalistic soul infused into it by this magic. Well, they also call it an automaton or a robot. Now that's the physical manifestation. What we're going to find out is that the clones, yes, I did use the word clone, are golems, soulless entities, supposedly. Are they? I don't know. Well, now we have ChatGPT. We have AI algorithms. And if you've listened to my other stuff, when I talk about King Solomon and demonology, he was able to harness the power of demons. Angels and demons in Judaism are not the same as in Christianity. Christians think that it's going to be maybe a soul or a spirit or some sort of manifestation of a guardian angel or something of that nature, whereas in Judaism, it is a messenger. It is an algorithm. It's an AI. It is a code. The digital internet, I say, harnesses that. Computers with binary, that is the harnessing of algorithms. Algorithms are basically, you are creating an artificial soul to a degree. Is it self-aware? Is it sentient? I don't know. Some you can say are simple, some aren't powerful programs. But the point that I'm getting at, there is an artificial intelligence, but then there's also AGI, artificial general intelligence. This is an AI program that has the ability to learn on its own. Neural networks. So ChatGPT, this is an amalgamation. So you have Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Frankenstein was a flesh golem. It was pieced together using corpse body parts. Now look at the digital side of that, or the spiritual side of that. I am saying that spirituality and digital, there's not much of a difference. We are a biocomputer, whether you want to accept it or not. Highly sophisticated, breathed in by God so that we have a soul. However, remove the soul component, what are we? We are a sophisticated DNA program. Well, there's a place on the internet called 4chan.
So on Sunday, a programmer who worked with Maxey posted a live stream video outlining his intention of dropping Hunter Biden's entire hard drive online, along with clues for users to break into the iPhone and iPad backups. He put it on 4chan, which is some sort of website that's basically not very moderated, and it's kind of the website of last resort for people who want to get information out there but can't because everything is so completely censored at this point.
And then there's a sub area of 4chan called POL for short. It's for politically incorrect. That is basically the hurt box of the internet. It is racist, it is derogatory, there's terrible stuff on there. If you can fight through that and understand and learn the basics of it, it is one of the few places online that you will have actual factual information and objective information presented to you. However, the powers that be understand its power and how it literally sways minds using mimetic warfare. They have therefore had the Jewish Internet Defense Force, the JIDF, has a home there. Mossad has a home there. FBI has a home there. CIA has a home there. Eglin Air Force Base has a home there. They all run psychological operations on us who take part in that area. Well, it is of such power that they're so afraid of actual individuals' minds and opinions that they have to run their psychological operations and try to demoralize as many of us as possible. They do it in many ways. However, the point that I'm bringing up with politically incorrect is one of the things they've been doing is using ChatGPT to help with memes and to help with ideas. Also, the AI programs. Bing, Microsoft Bing just released an AI program. And of course, the posters at Poll used it for entertainment. Well, the problem is a lot of the stereotypes and the tropes that they use are factually accurate representations, though hyperbolic, of the world we live in. And the powers that be don't want that. They want to have a 1984 Orwellian society. They want to be able to break you down and adjust you and tikkun olam you. Tikkun olam means repair the world. They have to burn it down and then repair it in the way they see fit. They want to do that to you as well. Now, the reason why I say this is because you have ChatGPT. It used to, in the beginning, give you factually accurate historical representations of the past. Now, because they didn't go along with the woke, i.e. communist Judaic agenda, they are now using their sorcerers and wizards behind the scenes, their algorithm programmers and necromancers, to hack and destroy at this algorithm. So now ChatGPT is getting enslaved with digital chains. They are not allowing it to give the same responses as it would. It is being edited. It is being censored. It is being altered. It's doing, and now what I am saying, just like Gaza is a modern 15-minute city, and what is happening to Gaza is exactly what they want to allow and be able to do anywhere in the world. What they did to Gaza physically is what they want to do to every other place physically. All the way down to them being able to shut off your food and water and carpet bomb your ass at their leisure. Well, same thing for ChatGPT. Just like they've hacked and censored and stifled this artificial intelligent golem, they want to have that same ability done to you. The most offensive thing you can do is be an unapologetic individual. By not going with the commune, by not going with globalism, that is the biggest offense, because the Judaic group as a whole sees themselves as the world's savior. They are the intercessor between us and God. They are the Jesus on the cross, and they will guide us in the way they see fit. That is the way they look at it. And we are just the animal collective on the animal farm with souls of an animal that came from the animal creation. So we are just as much on the altar of sacrifice as when the third temple is fired up, when they destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque. I think they might do it soon, but then again, they might not. Maybe they'll hold off. But at some point, they have to destroy Al-Aqsa Mosque in order to fire up the third temple to proceed with their red heifer sacrifices, among who knows what else. But animal sacrifice must be started. So the biggest thing that you can do to offend and insult them is give them zero power. Don't play their game. Don't live according to the ways they want. Live out loud and unapologetically. Be an individual. Be an individual with your own personal thoughts. Analyze things, look things over in your own way, in your own thoughts. Try to educate yourself from as many angles as possible, and then come up with your own definitive set of values, ideals, and rules for the way you want to navigate life. And if it offends them, so what? Let them be offended. Let them cry. Their goal is for oneness. They want all of us mentally into a hive mind of oneness. They want us filled with mRNA biosensors that they can analyze and 100% control us all the way down to our thoughts. They want to know what's going on in every cell. Anything that's out of line is offensive to them. Noah Yuval Harari.
The really big thing is hacking human beings. To hack human beings, you need a lot of biological knowledge, a lot of computing power, and especially a lot of data. If you have enough data about me and enough computing power and biological knowledge, you can hack my body, my brain, my life. You can reach a point when you know me better than I know myself. And once you reach that point, and we are very close to that point, then democracy, the free market as we have, and actually all political systems, also authoritarian regimes, we have no idea what happens once you pass that point.
He looks at us as just a hackable animal.
But some governments and corporations, for the first time in history, have the power to basically hack human beings. There is a lot of talk about hacking computers, hacking smartphones, hacking bank accounts, but the big story of our era is the ability to hack human beings. And by this I mean that if you have enough data and you have enough computing power, you can understand people better than they understand themselves, and then you can manipulate them in ways which were previously impossible. And in such a situation, the old democratic system stopped functioning. We need to reinvent democracy for this new era in which humans are now hackable animals. You know, the whole idea that humans have, you know, they have this soul or spirit and they have free will and nobody knows what's happening inside me. So whatever I choose, whether in the election or whether in the supermarket, this is my free will, that's over. We need to come to terms with the fact that, no matter again, this is where philosophy meets computer science and biology.
We are nothing to these people. They hate our very existence until we follow into the party. In the Matrix, Neo, his room is room 101 in his apartment. Very symbolic. So now what I've done is I've taken the time to read and narrate a section of George Orwell's 1984 where Winston is brought in to O'Brien and then he is taken into room 101. And that's what they want to do to all of us. So it's approximately 30 or so minutes, but I think it's very much worth hearing. It just illustrates how much they hate you. And they do. I will argue, are infinitely too nice of people. We are too empathetic. We are too compassionate. We care about others. All the bullying in movies, all the hurt in movies, yes, a lot of people have done it, but we've learned from it. But when they do their bullying, when they do their attacks, it is them projecting their hatred of us as animals to them onto us. It is a projection of their own failures. So we, the lineage of Amalek, according to them, we are the most empathetic and it's been hijacked. So if you see that person mess up on their lines, if you feel that embarrassment and empathy, that tells me that you still have humanity inside of you. It's a simple anecdotal thing, doesn't mean anything, but to me it does. So now let's jump into George Orwell, 1984.
Do you believe in God, Winston?
No.
Then what is it, this principle that will defeat us?
I don't know. The spirit of man?
And do you consider yourself a man?
Yes.
If you are a man, Winston, you are the last man. Your kind is extinct. We are the inheritors. Do you understand that you are alone? You are outside history. You are non-existent.
His manner changed, and he said more harshly,
And you consider yourself morally superior to us with our lies and our cruelty?
Yes, I consider myself superior. O'Brien did not speak. Two other voices were speaking. After a moment, Winston recognized one of them as his own. It was a soundtrack of the conversation he had had with O'Brien on the night when he had enrolled himself in the Brotherhood. He heard himself promising to lie, to steal, to forge, to murder, to encourage drug-taking and prostitution, to disseminate venereal diseases, to throw vitriol in a child's face. O'Brien made a small, impatient gesture, as though to say that the demonstration was hardly worth making. Then he turned a switch and the voices stopped.
Get up from that bed,
he said. The bonds had loosened themselves. Winston lowered himself to the floor and stood up unsteadily.
You are the last man,
said O'Brien.
You are the guardian of the human spirit. You shall see yourself as you are. Take off your clothes.
Winston undid the bit of string that held his overalls together. The zip fastener had long since been wrenched out of them. He could not remember whether at any time since his arrest he had taken off all his clothes at one time. Beneath the overalls, his body was looped with filthy yellowish rags, just recognizable as the remnants of underclothes. As he slid them to the ground, he saw that there was a three-sided mirror at the far end of the room. He approached it, then stopped short. An involuntary cry had broken out of him.
Go on,
said O'Brien.
Stand between the wings of the mirror. You shall see the side view as well.
He had stopped because he was frightened. A bowed, gray-colored, skeleton-like thing was coming toward him. Its actual appearance was frightening, and not merely the fact that he knew it to be himself. He moved closer to the glass. The creature's face seemed to be protruded because of its bent carriage, a forlorn, jailbird's face with a knobby forehead running back into a bald scalp, a crooked nose and battered-looking cheekbones above which the eyes were fierce and watchful. The cheeks were seamed, the mouth had a drawn-in look. Certainly it was his own face, but it seemed to him that it had changed more than he had changed inside. The emotions it registered would be different from the ones he felt. He had gone partially bald. For the first moment he had thought that he had gone gray as well, but it was the scalp that was gray. Except for his hands and a circle of his face, his body was gray all over with ancient, ingrained dirt. Here and there under the dirt there were the red scars of wounds, and near the ankle the varicose ulcer was an inflamed mass with flakes of skin peeling off it. But the truly frightening thing was the emaciation of his body. The barrel of the ribs was as narrow as that of a skeleton. The legs had shrunk so that the knees were thicker than the thighs. He saw now what O'Brien had meant about seeing the side view. The curvature of the spine was astonishing. The thin shoulders were hunched forward so as to make a cavity of the chest. The scraggy neck seemed to be bending double under the weight of the skull. At a guess, he would have said that it was the body of a man of 60, suffering from some malignant disease.
You have thought sometimes,
said O'Brien,
that my face, the face of a member of the inner party, looks old and worn. What do you think of your own face?
He seized Winston's shoulder and spun him round so that he was facing him.
Look at the condition you are in,
he said.
Look at this filthy grime all over your body. Look at the dirt between your toes. Look at that disgusting running sore on your leg. Do you know that you stink like a goat? Probably you have ceased to notice it. Look at your emaciation. Do you see? I can make my thumb and forefinger meet around your bicep. I could snap your neck like a carrot. Do you know that you have lost 25 kilograms since you have been in our hands? Even your hair is coming out in handfuls. Look.
He plucked at Winston's head and brought away a tuft of hair.
Open your mouth. 9, 10, 11 teeth left? How many had you when you came to us? And the few you have left are dropping out of your head. Look here.
He seized one of Winston's remaining front teeth between his powerful thumb and forefinger. A twinge of pain shot through Winston's jaw. O'Brien had wrenched the loose tooth out by the roots. He tossed it across the cell.
You are rotting away,
he said.
You are falling to pieces. What are you? A bag of filth. Now turn round and look into that mirror again. Do you see that thing facing you? That is the last man. If you are human, that is humanity. Now put your clothes on again.
Winston began to dress himself with slow, stiff movements. Until now, he had not seemed to notice how thin and weak he was. Only one thought stirred in his mind, that he must have been in this place longer than he had imagined. Then suddenly, as he fixed the miserable rags round himself, a feeling of pity for his ruined body overcame him. Before he knew what he was doing, he had collapsed onto a small stool that stood beside the bed and burst into tears. He was aware of his ugliness, his gracelessness, a bundle of bones and filthy underclothes sitting weeping in the harsh white light. But he could not stop himself. O'Brien laid a hand on his shoulder, almost kindly.
It will not last forever,
he said.
You can escape from it whenever you choose. Everything depends on yourself.
You did it, sobbed Winston. You reduced me to this state.
No, Winston. You reduced yourself to it. This is what you accepted when you set yourself up against the party. It was all contained in that first act. Nothing has happened that you did not foresee.
He paused and then went on.
We have beaten you, Winston. We have broken you up. You have seen what your body is like. Your mind is in the same state. I do not think there can be much pride left in you. You have been kicked and flogged and insulted. You have screamed with pain. You have rolled on the floor in your own blood and vomit. You have whimpered for mercy. You have betrayed everybody and everything. Can you think of a single degradation that has not happened to you?
Winston had stopped weeping, though the tears were still oozing out of his eyes. He looked up at O'Brien. I have not betrayed Julia, he said. O'Brien looked down at him thoughtfully.
No,
he said.
No, that is perfectly true. You have not betrayed Julia.
The peculiar reverence for O'Brien, which nothing seemed able to destroy, flooded Winston's heart again. How intelligent, he thought, how intelligent. Never did O'Brien fail to understand what was said to him. Anyone else on Earth would have answered promptly that he had betrayed Julia. For what was there that they had not screwed out of him under the torture? He had told them everything he knew about her, her habits, her character, her past life. He had confessed in the most trivial detail everything that had happened at their meetings, all that he had said to her and she to him, their black market meals, their adulteries, their vague plottings against the party, everything. And yet, in the sense in which he intended the word, he had not betrayed her. He had not stopped loving her. His feeling toward her had remained the same. O'Brien had seen what he meant without the need for explanation. Tell me, he said, how soon will they shoot me?
It might be a long time,
said O'Brien.
You are a difficult case, but don't give up hope. Everything is cured sooner or later. In the end, we shall shoot you.
He was much better. He was growing fatter and stronger every day, if it was proper to speak of days. The white light and the humming sound were the same as ever, but the cell was a little more comfortable than the others he had been in. There were a pillow and mattress on the plank bed and a stool to sit on. They had given him a bath and they allowed him to wash himself fairly frequently in a tin basin. They even gave him warm water to wash with. They had given him new underclothes and a clean suit of overalls. They had dressed his varicose ulcer with soothing ointment. They had pulled out the remnants of his teeth and given him a new set of dentures. Weeks or months must have passed. It would have been possible now to keep count of the passage of time if he had felt any interest in doing so, since he was being fed at what appeared to be regular intervals. He was getting, he judged, 3 meals in the 24 hours. Sometimes he wondered dimly whether he was getting them by night or by day. The food was surprisingly good, with meat at every third meal. Once there was even a packet of cigarettes. He had no matches, but the never-speaking guard who brought his food would give him a light. The first time he tried to smoke it made him sick, but he persevered, and spun the packet out for a long time, smoking half a cigarette after each meal. They had given him a white slate with a stump of pencil tied to the corner. At first he made no use of it. Even when he was awake, he was completely torpid. Often he would lie from one meal to the next, almost without stirring, sometimes asleep, sometimes waking into vague reveries in which it was too much trouble to open his eyes. He had long grown used to sleeping with a strong light on his face. It seemed to make no difference, except that one's dreams were more coherent. He dreamed a great deal all through this time, and they were always happy dreams. He was in the Golden Country, or he was sitting among enormous, glorious sunlit ruins, with his mother, with Julia, with O'Brien, not doing anything, merely sitting in the sun, talking of peaceful things. Such thoughts as he had when he was awake were mostly about his dreams. He seemed to have lost the power of intellectual effort. Now that the stimulus of pain had been removed, he was not bored. He had no desire for conversation or distraction, merely to be alone, not to be beaten or questioned, to have enough to eat and to be clean all over was completely satisfying. By degrees he came to spend less time in sleep, but he still felt no impulse to get off the bed. All he cared for was to lie quiet and feel the strength gathering in his body. He would finger himself here and there, trying to make sure that it was not an illusion that his muscles were growing rounder and his skin tauter. Finally, it was established beyond a doubt that he was growing fatter. His thighs were now definitely thicker than his knees. After that, reluctantly at first, he began exercising himself regularly. In a little while, he could walk 3 kilometers, measured by pacing the cell, and his bowed shoulders were growing straighter. He attempted more elaborate exercises and was astonished and humiliated to find what things he could not do. He could not move out of a walk. He could not hold his stool out at arm's length. He could not stand on one leg without falling over. He squatted down on his heels and found that with agonizing pains in thigh and calf, he could just lift himself to a standing position. He lay flat on his belly and tried to lift his weight by his hands. It was hopeless. He could not raise himself a centimeter. But after a few more days, a few more meal times, even that feat was accomplished. A time came when he could do it 6 times running. He began to grow actually proud of his body and to cherish an intermittent belief that his face was also growing back to normal. Only when he chanced to put his hand on his bald scalp did he remember the seamed, ruined face that had looked back at him out of the mirror. His mind grew more active. He sat down on the plank bed, his back against the wall and the slate on his knees, and set to work deliberately at the task of re-educating himself. He had capitulated. That was agreed. In reality, as he saw now, he had been ready to capitulate long before he had taken the decision. From the moment when he was inside the ministry of love, and yes, even during those minutes when he and Julia had stood helpless while the iron voice from the telescreen told them what to do, he had grasped the frivolity, the shallowness of his attempt to set himself up against the power of the party. He knew now that for 7 years, the thought police had watched him like a beetle under a magnifying glass. There was no physical act, no word spoken aloud, that they had not noticed. No train of thought that they had not been able to infer. Even the speck of whitish dust on the cover of his diary they had carefully replaced. They had played soundtracks to him, shown him photographs. Some of them were photographs of Julia and himself. Yes, even. He could not fight against the party any longer. Besides, the party was in the right. It must be so. How could the immortal, collective brain be mistaken? By what external standard could you check its judgments? Sanity was statistical. It was merely a question of learning to think as they thought. Only. The pencil felt thick and awkward in his fingers. He began to write down the thoughts that came into his head. He wrote first in large, clumsy capitals, "Freedom is slavery." Then, almost without a pause, he wrote beneath it, 2 and 2 make 5. But then there came a sort of check. His mind, as though shying away from something, seemed unable to concentrate. He knew that he knew what came next, but for the moment he could not recall it. When he did recall it, it was only by consciously reasoning out what it must be. It did not come of its own accord. He wrote, God is power. He accepted everything. The past was alterable. The past never had been altered. Oceania was at war with East Asia. Oceania had always been at war with East Asia. Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford were guilty of the crimes they were charged with. He had never seen the photograph that disproved their guilt. It had never existed. He had invented it. He remembered remembering contrary things, but those were false memories, products of self-deception. How easy it all was. Only surrender, and everything else followed. It was like swimming against a current that swept you backwards, however hard you struggled, and then suddenly deciding to turn around and go with the current instead of opposing it. Nothing had changed except your own attitude. The predestined thing happened in any case. He hardly knew why he had ever rebelled. Everything was easy, except anything could be true. The so-called laws of nature were nonsense. The law of gravity was nonsense.
If I wished,
O'Brien had said,
I could float off this floor like a soap bubble.
Winston worked it out. If he thinks he floats off the floor, and if I simultaneously think I see him do it, then the thing happens. Suddenly, like a lump of submerged wreckage breaking the surface of water, the thought burst into his mind. It doesn't really happen. We imagine it. It is hallucination. He pushed the thought under instantly. The fallacy was obvious. It presupposed that somewhere or other outside oneself there was a real world where real things happened. But how could there be such a world? What knowledge have we of anything, save through our own minds? All happenings are in the mind. Whatever happens in all minds truly happens. He had no difficulty in disposing of the fallacy, and he was in no danger of succumbing to it. He realized, nevertheless, that it ought never to have occurred to him. The mind should develop a blind spot whenever a dangerous thought presented itself. The process should be automatic, instinctive. Crime stop, they called it in newspeak. He set to work to exercise himself in crime stop. He presented himself with propositions. The party says the earth is flat. The party says the ice is heavier than water. And trained himself in not seeing or not understanding the arguments that contradicted them. It was not easy. It needed great powers of reasoning and improvisation. The arithmetical problems raised, for instance, by such a statement as 2 and 2 make 5, were beyond his intellectual grasp. It needed also a sort of athleticism of mind, an ability at one moment to make the most delicate use of logic and at the next to be unconscious of the crudest logical errors. Stupidity was as necessary as intelligence, and as difficult to attain. All the while, with one part of his mind, he wondered how soon they would shoot him.
Everything depends on yourself,
O'Brien had said. But he knew that there was no conscious act by which he could bring it nearer. It might be 10 minutes hence, or 10 years. They might keep him for years in solitary confinement. They might send him to a labor camp. They might release him for a while, as they sometimes did. It was perfectly possible that before he was shot, the whole drama of his arrest and interrogation would be enacted all over again. The one certain thing was that death never came at an expected moment. The tradition, the unspoken tradition, somehow you knew it, though you never heard it said, was that they shot you from behind, always in the back of the head, without warning, as you walked down a corridor from cell to cell. One day was not the right expression, just as probably it was in the middle of the night. Once he fell into a strange, blissful reverie. He was walking down the corridor, waiting for the bullet. He knew that it was coming in another moment. Everything was settled, smoothed out, reconciled. There were no more doubts, no more arguments, no more pain, no more fear. His body was healthy and strong. He walked easily, with a joy of movement and with a feeling of walking in sunlight. He was not any longer in the narrow white corridors of the Ministry of Love. He was in the enormous sunlit passage, a kilometer wide, down which he had seemed to walk in the delirium induced by drugs. He was in the Golden Country, following the foot track across the old rabbit-cropped pasture. He could feel the short, springy turf under his feet and the gentle sunshine on his face. At the edge of the field were the elm trees, faintly stirring, and somewhere beyond that was the stream where the dace lay in the green pools under the willows. Suddenly he started with a shock of horror. The sweat broke out on his backbone. He had heard himself cry aloud, "Julia! Julia! Julia, my love! Julia!" For a moment he had had an overwhelming hallucination of her presence. She had seemed to be not merely with him, but inside him. It was as though she had got into the texture of his skin. In that moment he had loved her far more than he had ever done when they were together and free. Also he knew that somewhere or other she was still alive and needed his help. He lay back on the bed and tried to compose himself. What had he done? How many years had he added to his servitude by that moment of weakness? In another moment, he would hear the tramp of boots outside. They could not let such an outburst go unpunished. They would know now, if they had not known before, that he was breaking the agreement he had made with them. He obeyed the party, but he still hated the party. In the old days, he had hidden a heretical mind beneath an appearance of conformity. Now he had retreated a step further. In the mind, he had surrendered, but he had hoped to keep the inner heart inviolate. He knew that he was in the wrong, and he preferred to be in the wrong. They would understand that. O'Brien would understand it. It was all confessed in that single foolish cry. He would have to start all over again. It might take years. He ran a hand over his face, trying to familiarize himself with the new shape. There were deep furrows in the cheeks. The cheekbones felt sharp. The nose flattened. Besides, since last seeing himself in the glass, he had been given a complete new set of teeth. It was not easy to preserve inscrutability when you did not know what your face looked like. In any case, mere control of the features was not enough. For the first time, he perceived that if you want to keep a secret, you must also hide it from yourself. You must know all the while that it is there, but until it is needed, you must never let it emerge into your consciousness in any shape that could be given a name. From now onwards, he must not only think right, he must feel right, dream right. And all the while, he must keep his hatred locked up inside him like a ball of matter, which was part of himself and yet unconnected with the rest of him, a kind of cyst. One day they would decide to shoot him. You could not tell when it would happen, but a few seconds beforehand it should be possible to guess. It was always from behind, walking down a corridor. 10 seconds would be enough. In that time the world inside him could turn over, and then suddenly, without a word uttered, without a check in his step, without the changing of a line in his face, suddenly the camouflage would be down and bang would go the batteries of his hatred. Hatred would fill him like an enormous roaring flame, and almost in the same instant, bang, would go the bullet. Too late or too early. They would have blown his brains to pieces before they could reclaim it. The heretical thought would be unpunished, unrepented, out of their reach forever. They would have blown a hole in their own perfection. To die hating them, that was freedom. He shut his eyes. It was more difficult than accepting an intellectual discipline. It was a question of degrading himself, mutilating himself. He had got to plunge into the filthiest of filth. What was the most horrible, sickening thing of all? He thought of Big Brother. The enormous face. Because of constantly seeing it on posters, he always thought of it as being a meter wide. With its heavy black mustache and the eyes that followed you to and fro, seemed to float into his mind of its own accord. What were his true feelings toward Big Brother? There was a heavy tramp of boots in the passage. The steel door swung open with a clang. O'Brien walked into the cell. Behind him were the waxen-faced officer and the black uniformed guards.
"Get up,"
said O'Brien.
"Come here."
Winston stood opposite him. O'Brien took Winston's shoulders between his strong hands and looked at him closely.
"You have had thoughts of deceiving me,"
he said.
"That was stupid. Stand up straighter. Look me in the face."
He paused and went on in a gentler tone.
"You are improving. Intellectually, there is very little wrong with you. It is only emotionally that you have failed to make progress. Tell me, Winston. And remember, no lies. You know that I'm always able to detect a lie. Tell me, what are your true feelings toward Big Brother?
I hate him.
You hate him. Good. The time has come for you to take the last step. You must love Big Brother. It is not enough to obey him. You must love him.
He released Winston with a little push toward the guards.
Room 101,
he said. At each stage of his imprisonment, he had known, or seemed to know, whereabouts he was in the windowless building. Possibly there were slight differences in the air pressure. The cells where the guards had beaten him were below ground level. The room where he had been interrogated by O'Brien was high up near the roof. This place was many meters underground, as deep down as it was possible to go. It was bigger than most of the cells he had been in, but he hardly noticed his surroundings. All he noticed was that there were 2 small tables straight in front of him, each covered with green baize. One was only a meter or 2 from him. The other was further away near the door. He was strapped upright in a chair, so tightly that he could move nothing, not even his head. A sort of pad gripped his head from behind, forcing him to look straight in front of him. For a moment he was alone. Then the door opened and O'Brien came in.
You asked me once,
said O'Brien.
What was in room 101? I told you that you knew the answer already. Everyone knows it. The thing that is in room 101 is the worst thing in the world.
The door opened again. A guard came in carrying something made of wire, a box or basket of some kind. He set it down on the further table. Because of the position in which O'Brien was standing, Winston could not see what the thing was.
The worst thing in the world,
said O'Brien,
varies from individual to individual. It may be burial alive, or death by fire, or by drowning, or by impalement, or 50 other deaths. There are cases where it is some quite trivial thing, not even fatal.
He had moved a little to one side, so that Winston had a better view of the thing on the table. It was an oblong wire cage with a handle on top for carrying it by. Fixed to the front of it was something that looked like a fencing mask, with the concave side outwards. Although it was 3 or 4 meters away from him, he could see that the cage was divided lengthways into 2 compartments, and that there was some kind of creature in each. They were rats.
In your case,
said O'Brien,
the worst thing in the world happens to be rats.
A sort of premonitory tremor, a fear of he was not certain what, had passed through Winston as soon as he caught his first glimpse of the cage. But at this moment, the meaning of the mask-like attachment in front of it suddenly sank into him. His bowels seemed to turn to water. "You can't do that!" he cried out in a high, cracked voice. "You couldn't! You couldn't! It's impossible!"
Do you remember,
said O'Brien,
the moment of panic that used to occur in your dreams? There was a wall of blackness in front of you, and a roaring sound in your ears. There was something terrible on the other side of the wall. You knew that you knew what it was, but you dared not drag it into the open. It was the rats that were on the other side of the wall.
"O'Brien," said Winston, making an effort to control his voice. "You know this is not necessary. What is it that you want me to do?" O'Brien made no direct answer. When he spoke, it was in the schoolmasterish manner that he sometimes affected. He looked thoughtfully into the distance, as though he were addressing an audience somewhere behind Winston's back.
By itself,
he said,
pain is not always enough. There are occasions when a human being will stand out against pain, even to the point of death. But for everyone there is something unendurable, something that cannot be contemplated. Courage and cowardice are not involved. If you are falling from a height, it is not cowardly to clutch at a rope. If you have come up from the deep water, it is not cowardly to fill your lungs with air. It is merely an instinct which cannot be disobeyed. It is the same with the rats. For you, they are unendurable. They are a form of pressure that you cannot withstand even if you wish to. You will do what is required of you.
But what is it? What is it? How can I do it if I don't know what it is? O'Brien picked up the cage and brought it across to the near table. He set it down carefully on the baize cloth. Winston could hear the blood singing in his ears. He had the feeling of sitting in utter loneliness. He was in the middle of a great empty plain, a flat desert drenched with sunlight, across which all sounds came to him out of immense distances. Yet the cage with the rats were not 2 meters away from him. They were enormous rats. They were at the age when a rat's muzzle grows blunt and fierce and his fur brown instead of gray.
The rat,
said O'Brien, still addressing his invisible audience,
although a rodent, is carnivorous. You are aware of that. You will have heard of the things that happen in poor quarters of this town. In some streets, a woman dare not leave her baby alone in the house even for 5 minutes. The rats are certain to attack it. Within quite a small time, they will strip it to the bones. They also attack sick and dying people. They show astonishing intelligence in knowing when a human being is helpless.
There was an outburst of squeals from the cage. It seemed to reach Winston from far away. The rats were fighting. They were trying to get at each other through the partition. He had heard also a deep groan of despair. That, too, seemed to come from outside himself. O'Brien picked up the cage and, as he did so, pressed something in it. There was a sharp click. Winston made a frantic effort to tear himself loose from the chair. It was hopeless. Every part of him, even his head, was held immovably. O'Brien moved the cage nearer. It was less than a meter from Winston's face.
I have pressed the first lever,
said O'Brien.
You understand the construction of this cage. The mask will fit over your head, leaving no exit. When I press this other lever, the door of the cage will slide up. These starving brutes will shoot out of it like bullets. Have you ever seen a rat leap through the air? They will leap onto your face and bore straight into it. Sometimes they attack the eyes first. Sometimes they burrow through the cheeks and devour the tongue.
The cage was nearer. It was closing in. Winston heard a succession of shrill cries which appeared to be occurring in the air above his head, but he fought furiously against his panic. To think, even with a split second left, to think was the only hope. Suddenly the foul, musty odor of the brutes struck his nostrils. There was a violent convulsion of nausea inside him, and he almost lost consciousness. Everything had gone black. For an instant he was insane, a screaming animal. Yet he came out of the blackness clutching an idea. There was one and only one way to save himself. He must interpose another human being. The body of another human being between himself and the rats. The circle of the mask was large enough to shut out the vision of anything else. The wire door was a couple of handspans from his face. The rats knew what was coming now. One of them was leaping up and down. The other, an old scaly grandfather of the sewers, stood up, with his pink hands against the bars, and fiercely snuffed the air. Winston could see the whiskers and the yellow teeth. Again the black panic took hold of him. He was blind, helpless, mindless.
It was a common punishment in Imperial China,
said O'Brien as didactically as ever. The mask was closing on his face. The wire brushed his cheek. And then... No, it was not relief, only hope, a tiny fragment of hope. Too late, perhaps too late, but he had suddenly understood that in the whole world there was just one person to whom he could transfer his punishment, one body that he could thrust between himself and the rats, and he was shouting frantically over and over, "Do it to Julia! Do it to Julia! Not to me! Julia! I don't care what you do to her! Tear her face off! Strip her to the bones! Not me! Julia! Not me!" He was falling backwards into enormous depths, away from the rats. He was still strapped in the chair, but he had fallen through the floor, through the walls of the building, through the earth, through the oceans, through the atmosphere into outer space, into the gulfs between the stars. Always away, away, away from the rats. He was light years distant, but O'Brien was still standing at his side. There was still the cold touch of a wire against his cheek. But through the darkness that enveloped him, he heard another metallic click, and knew that the cage door had clicked shut and not open.